Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to this special live edition of Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. It has been a remarkable 24 hours in which U.S. Special Forces, in a lightning-fast raid, captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Maduro and his wife were then flown to the New York area where they are facing federal charges accusing them of being narco-terrorists. Late last night, the White House posted this video to social media, a perp walk, if you will, of Maduro, where he wished everyone a good night and a happy new year. Following Maduro's capture, Donald Trump held a press conference from Mar-a-Lago in which he made the stunning announcement that the United States was now running Venezuela.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country.
But it is still very much unclear what that means and how that will actually work. But the president did not rule out sending troops back into Venezuela. He also was not shy about saying what the ultimate goal was with Venezuela, and that was controlling their oil.
We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so.
Now, the Cuban-American members of Congress from South Florida offered their unconditional support for President Trump.
We warned that what we were seeing in this hemisphere was not political theater. It wasn't a show, that this was real, that the President of the United States had been very clear about his policy. The day of accepting the death of American citizens, the poisoning of our youth, the destabilization of our hemisphere are over.
Trump had the internal fortitude, had the political pants to do what no other president, Republican and Democrat, for the last 25 years that you have been serving in Congress and have been a member of the news media, no one had that resolution of liberating the hemisphere from thugs like this Maduro.
Thank you, President Trump, for taking the action to protect American lives, to protect American interests. And people say, what are we doing in Venezuela? How is that America first? It's damn right it's America first.
Damn right it's America first. All right, and joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who represents a very large Venezuelan community in Broward. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Let's just start with your general reaction to the events of the last 24, 30 hours.
Well, I share my constituents who, from whose native country is Venezuela's real satisfaction that Maduro is finally gone. That is absolutely essential. It was absolutely essential. He is a leader who has committed crimes against humanity. He was indicted by the United States for narco crimes and for a myriad of other abuses. And so his departure and the fact that he had so many chances, Jim, I mean, Maduro had so many opportunities through negotiation with the opposition, negotiation with multiple administrations, for him to make a transition to democracy and to depart Venezuela's leadership. And he refused. And so the result is that with an indictment, the United States went in and got someone who was an indicted criminal that needed to face charges. But at the same time, this is a situation where you have a true democratically elected individual, Edmundo Gonzalez. That process, people forget, was negotiated with Maduro as well. And those democratic elections were won by the opposition with about 70% of the vote. And so the natural next step, and it's breathtaking to me that this is not what apparently President Trump plans, is to make sure that the rightfully elected president, Edmundo Gonzalez, and the opposition party that won that election would be able to assume the presidency.
Congressman Noriega, let me jump in here. And you know, it's not just that. He also declared that the U.S. was now running Venezuela for some indeterminate period of time. And even went so far as to talk about how Marco Rubio had a lovely conversation, a great conversation with Maduro's handpicked vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, suggesting that the Trump administration is okay with allowing the Chavistas to remain in power as long as they do U.S. bidding. How is this going to work with Marco Rubio, I guess, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth now running Venezuela?
I mean, that is also breathtaking, Jim. I mean, where in U.S. law does it say that, when we rightfully go in and arrest a leader who has been convicted who has been indicted on U.S. crimes, where in U.S. law does it then give us the right or the ability to run another sovereign nation? I mean, and on top of that, the Venezuelans that I represent have long expected that Maria Corina Machado's opposition party, whose candidate was Edmundo Gonzalez, would become the president of Venezuela once that transition happened. And I mean, when you cut off the head of a snake, only to substitute it for a crony's head of the same snake, that's just an unacceptable outcome. And I mean, democracy is America first. That democracy is America first, not taking over a sovereign nation and essentially, with Trump's comments yesterday, only talking about oil and the profits that we could make from the oil that Venezuela has. That's not what I think my community signed up for.
Doesn't that play right into the Venezuelan government's hands when Donald Trump talks so much about oil? That, again, this is the notion of U.S. imperialism wanting to go into countries in Latin America and basically view them as colonies, that they're resources. I think Donald Trump even referred to Venezuelan oil as our oil. They stole our oil, meaning the oil in Venezuela.
Right. I mean, we have certainly had contracts over the years for refining that oil, and there are sanctions on that oil. But at the end of the day, there's nothing in the Constitution or in U.S. law that says that we can indiscriminately go into countries and remove their leaders. It's one thing with an indicted criminal heading a country who refused to leave, who violated the sovereignty of his own nation, who's abused his people, committed gross human rights violations, and then transitioned to democracy. But for Trump to say that he's going to take over the country and to be dismissive of Maria Corina Machado and actually say that she doesn't have the support of Venezuelans in the country, I mean, that's just the furthest thing from the truth. She has overwhelming support there. And this doesn't appear to have been thought through in terms of the day after. And if the result is Maduro's crony, Delcy Rodriguez, just doing Trump's bidding, and Venezuela does not end up transitioning to a democratically elected government, then, I mean, we've violated every principle of our Constitution and I think, laws in our country.
Let me ask you, I just want to jump in a couple of quick things. I want to get a quick response to Marco Rubio during the press conference yesterday, said that in not the kind of mission that this was, that could be briefed members of Congress, the Gang of Eight and others. How do you think your colleagues are going to be reacting on both sides of the aisle, on the intelligence community and the senior leadership, about the idea that the United States president doesn't need to notify them before invading a country?
Our Constitution only gives and vests the authority to declare war with the United States Congress. I know it's an inconvenient fact that we have three co-equal branches of government for the Trump administration to follow, but I mean, to suggest that John Thune, the leader of the Senate, was going to leak to the press that this operation was going to take place is preposterous for anyone that knows John Thune. But also now Trump is suggesting that there's going to be a second operation. I mean, Maduro is arrested. What grounds would there be for him to engage in an operation again without consulting Congress? That's what our Constitution requires. And particularly if he's going to use a lawless operation to run another sovereign nation, so that he can exploit its oil.
I want to get your reaction too to the notion of, now that this has occurred, and there's chaos right now in Venezuela. We don't know who's really in control, what the military's role is. The issue of temporary protective status for the Venezuelans in our community. You know, Trump has been trying to strip that away. And I don't know at this point whether or not he sees this as a green light to further deport Venezuelans, or if you are calling and others are calling on him to at least extend TPS during this period of uncertainty.
This moment absolutely calls for him to restore and extend TPS for the Venezuelans that had that protected status that he took away, because if there is any situation that meets the definition of the need for TPS under U.S. law, it is one in which the chaos, instability, and danger that exists in Venezuela now, who we don't even really know who's running the country, and there's not stability, it warrants making sure that Venezuelans here need that protection and need to be able to remain in this country until the Venezuela actually establishes safety and order.
You know, it seems as if so much of the argument was about drugs, and then it did shift again to oil. I keep coming back to oil because the president keeps bringing up oil and talking about how the oil companies will go in and rebuild and profit and win back the money that they lost, But it also seems to me that in doing so, the U.S. government has forgotten how Chavez came to power in the first place, which was rebelling against things like this. So, where do you see the future? How do you see this playing out over the next, weeks, months, a year from now?
Well, that is an absolute question mark. We do not have a good track record with regime change in Latin America. We don't appear to have a firm plan in place for the day after Trump executed this removal of Maduro. Again, Maduro being gone deserved to be arrested, and I'm really glad to see that happened. But I will be really terrified if we run this country for an interminable period of time, or any period of time, rather than presiding over with Latin American partners transitioning to democracy, which would garner support. Instead, what won't garner support is coming in and taking over a sovereign nation and having our way with it, only to exploit its oil, resulting in the same regime being in charge, or de facto being in charge, so that Trump can exploit its oil reserves.
Yeah, it does.
That is chilling.
It reminds me a lot of Iraq. I remember the argument was that was going to pay for itself. The oil was going to pay for everything. We were going to be fine. They would greet us as liberators. And
doesn't have to be this way.
But I think the only lesson from Iraq was literally, keep the government in place, at least somewhat, because once they removed Saddam Hussein, the country fell apart. So I guess they want to try to play footsie with Chavista, but we'll have to see. Congresswoman, I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us. All right.
Thank you.
When we come back, I talked to Florida Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins, a former Green Beret who served in Latin America for years. We'll get his unique perspective on the military action. Stay with us.
Force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history.
Now, that was President Trump yesterday describing the military operation that was led by U.S. Special Forces. As events were unfolding yesterday, I spoke to Florida Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins, a former Green Beret who was deployed twice to Latin America.
So when I talk to a lot of my Venezuelan friends, the people who moved here from that country, and I talk to the people who I served with in 7th Special Forces Group, this is a big moment. January 3rd will be something that's remembered in the Venezuelan community for a long time. And among the people who fought for freedom abroad, Maduro is very much that old school, break people down, socialism destroys communities, destroys families. And, we've seen it put up and destroy Venezuela, which was once the richest nation in South America, and it is now, frankly, everyone's poverty driven and overcome. It's heartbreaking. I was excited to see what happened because, as we saw in the last elections, when Gonzalez had some, we'll say, surprising results of how things turned out mathematically, the people want change and freedom matters. And I hope and pray that they get the leadership that they want in Venezuela, and look forward to a free and freely elected and chosen group of leaders.
If this had taken place maybe 10 years earlier, you might have been involved in it, given your background. Just talk to me a little bit from your unique perspective. What goes into an operation like this?
Jim, I'll tell you, man, having prepared for things similar to this many, many times, there are months and months of excruciating planning, understanding the footprint of where you're going to strike, a primary target, a secondary target, even a tertiary or quaternary level target. All of those things can happen where people move last second. You have to know all of them. You have to do actions on and priming and running through how things can go. So if things do go wrong, which generally happens, it's Murphy's luck, right? You can react as a group the same way. That is hundreds and hundreds of repetitions. Then you have to look at intelligence and sourcing and making sure that you're doing this in accordance with the laws of our nation, because those matter. We all want to do this the right way. And I will tell you, having been downrange, if you don't have sourcing, you don't have positive ID, and you don't have more than likely double or triple source on this, it's going to be hard to strike something like this.
Well, the overlapping, the nature of both having the intelligence community, the CIA, as well as the military assets and law enforcement assets all sort of coming together, that's a remarkable coordination that would have to take place, wouldn't it?
That is, and that's actually not as rare as you may think. Often we work together with those folks. We train to raise everybody up back at home, right? Because we're all trying to get better, whatever our primary task is, and it's good to learn from each other. But in moments like this, you want to make sure that your task organization has the right elements, the right people to do this in compliance with our laws. And I think you've seen the response from our country very much indicate that's why the DEA was there. That's why we took the approach. That's why we brought him back here to face justice.
I know from a military standpoint, you always want a clearly defined mission. You want to be able to know this is what success looks like. In this mission, it was clear this was the goal, was to go and grab Nicolas Maduro and his wife and extract them out of the country. But as this moves forward, we've heard the president talk about having, maybe a second wave and additional boots on the ground. Are you at all concerned with making sure that that mission is well defined? And if it's not, isn't that where you end up in danger, as we saw in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and others?
Well, to your point, the actions were done meticulously. They were incredible. And again, hats off to our people on the ground. The mission and the success mode was clear. In terms of where this goes in the future, I think what they're saying practically from the Trump administration is we want to hand this off to the Venezuelan government to step in and step up and lead their people into free and real elections, to get the right people in charge as driven by the people in Venezuela. I don't think anybody in the Trump administration, from what I see, wants to do a long-term boots on the ground at all. And personally, I completely agree. We do not need to be boots on the ground long-term. We do not need to be nation building. And I would love to see us, finish what we're doing and go home. Mission accomplished here, and transition this to the people in Venezuela to do what they have to do.
And that's really the question. Will we just now go home? Up next, I talked to Manuel Noriega's former defense attorney to get his thoughts about the Maduro indictment. And later, we will explore what does all of this mean for Cuba. That's coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. I want to show you what is now two new historic images. On the left is the photo of Manuel Noriega aboard the cargo plane after he was captured on January 3rd, 1990. And the picture on the right comes exactly 36 years to the day later. Nicolas Maduro in the custody of DEA agents aboard the USS Iwo Jima. Now, it's natural to draw parallels between the Noriega case and the one Maduro is now facing. So earlier, I spoke to John May, who represented Noriega for 20 years throughout his trials and appeals. And I started by asking if he thought Maduro would be declared a prisoner of war as Noriega had been.
No, he doesn't have any. That's a non-issue. First of all, even though the military was involved, the government is claiming that this was sort of a police action that was supported by the military in order to keep everybody safe. He is not a member of the military. Was not a member of the military when this action occurred, and the POW convention, a part of the Geneva Convention, simply does not apply to Maduro in the way that it applied to General Noriega.
John, you've had a chance to review the indictment. What's your takeaway?
Of course, anytime you look at an indictment, before you see the evidence, before you examine the witnesses, they always look, compelling and overwhelming. But in a lot of instances, that's just not the case. But certainly everybody who reads that indictment is going to say, oh, this man must be guilty. Everything here must be true. And that's often not the case.
You and I noted that there are probably many criminal defense attorneys that would want to represent him, but the issue becomes, how do they get paid, and has the U.S. frozen all of his assets? And I think, in our conversation before we went on air, you had actually said this is the kind of case that if a defense attorney takes it, it could bankrupt them. So what are the challenges as a defense attorney potentially looking at representing Nicolas Maduro?
Well, as in a lot of things, if you don't have money, you can't build a building. And in a case like this, it will take millions of dollars to be able to mount a defense on behalf of Maduro. And the government does not want Maduro to have the best counsel money can buy, and will do. I'm certain they set this in motion even before the invasion. Everything necessary to freeze his assets worldwide. This government is going to do everything possible to make sure that Maduro receive court-appointed counsel, not private counsel, and limited resources, because they want to obtain a conviction and do not want a fair trial. They want the appearance of a fair trial.
I'm sure there'll be a defense attorney still willing to take that case. Up next, we will get reaction from the Venezuelan community here in South Florida and talk to a former U.S. ambassador to Latin America. That's coming up in just a few minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special live edition of Facing South Florida. Before we look ahead to what comes next in Venezuela, I don't want to lose sight of the joy, the justifiable joy being experienced by the Venezuelan community here in South Florida. And so let's bring in CBS Miami's Bree Buckley, who is in Doral. Bree, obviously so much happiness in the Venezuelan community. What have you been hearing from people? And give us a taste of what that's been like.
Yeah, well, so many Venezuelan Americans here in Doral saying this is a day they dreamed of, but they never thought they would see, waiting years for this. Now, we do see Doral police that are here waiting for folks to show up again, as the crowds were here yesterday, blocking this entire parking lot, blocking the streets, just celebrating. And you could just feel that joy even just looking at the video. So take a look with me here. This was the scene yesterday as just so many came out here to celebrate after they heard the news. All day yesterday, crowds filled the parking lot here outside El Arapazo, blowing horns, playing drums, singing and chanting and celebrating, calling this the beginning of a new chapter for Venezuela. Now, many tell us this is a celebration they've been waiting years for, hoping this is a step towards democracy after decades of oppression under Maduro and Hugo Chavez. Now, we saw some people wearing shirts with a photo of Nicolas Maduro that was posted to Truth Social by President Donald Trump. Families have been separated for years. Many say it wasn't safe to return, now feeling like that is finally an option again. Take a listen.
For the first time in many, many years, I'm hopeful that I can see my family, that we can see the house that my mother grew up in, that we can see the legacy that my grandfather created down there.
I came in this country when I was 10 years old, and ever since I was born, every single person in power of the country has abused us and abused of their power. We have been living in a dictatorship for about 20 years. So I can tell you, this feels like a breath of fresh air.
Countless stories, just like the two you heard there, of families being separated. Now that feeling of hope renewed that they will be able to return soon. As for President Trump saying the U.S. government is running the country, many families here that we spoke with say that's a move they're glad to hear. Now reporting live in Doral, Bree Buckley, CBS News, Miami.
Thank you, Bree. And, it's so important that obviously what takes place going forward honors what the Venezuelan community has lost. And so we'll obviously keep up. And that's why it's so important about understanding what comes next. Bree, thank you. I want to play two more pieces of sound from yesterday's press conference. The first is from Marco Rubio.
This guy had multiple opportunities to find his way somewhere else and figure out another. He could have been living somewhere else right now, very happy. But instead, he wanted to play big boy. And so now, he's got other sets of problems on his hands. And but I think the message here should be for the world. Look, the president doesn't go out looking for people to pick fights with. He's not generally wants to get along with everybody. We'll talk and meet with anybody. But don't play games. Don't play games with this president's in office, because it's not going to turn out well.
Now, the next piece of sound that caught my attention was on whether the capture of Maduro should be seen as a message to Cuba. Here is what President Trump had to say about that.
Well, Cuba's an interesting case. Cuba is, not doing very well right now. That system has not been a very good one for Cuba. The people there have suffered for many, many years. And I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about, because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation. And we want to help the people. It's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country.
All right, I want to turn now and bring in former Ambassador Frank Mora, who was the U.S. Ambassador to the OAS during the Biden administration. Frank, thank you for joining us this morning. I guess I want to start with this notion of what comes next in Venezuela. From what you've seen in the last 30 hours, do we have a sense of what comes next, or is this really the wild card right now?
Morning, Jim. Yeah, I think we don't know. There were two things that were kind of stunning about the press conference, and there were a number of things. The first one, of course, is the president said that we now control Venezuela, that we are now governing Venezuela. How that looks like, it's not clear. We don't have troops on the ground. We don't have an embassy in Venezuela. So how does that look like? And the second thing he said that was quite stunning was that Maria Corina Machado and the opposition are just not ready for prime time, that they don't have the respect and the support of the Venezuelan people. I disagree with that view. I think she does, but in a sense, the president threw her under the bus. So how the future looks like, that's difficult to say. If I was to extrapolate, Jim, it seems like Delcy Rodriguez, the former vice president, apparently now the president, is negotiating with the United States and is going to, act like an agent or representative of the United States and governing Venezuela for a period of time until a transition can be set up. That seems far-fetched to me. The other thing is Delcy Rodriguez is really not a powerful person in Venezuela. Her power came from what was delegated by Nicolas Maduro. The real power in Venezuela are Diosdado Cabello, the head of the sort of repressive apparatus of Venezuela, and General Padrino Lopez, who is the head of the army. These are the two powers behind the throne, if you will, and those are the two that need to decide what the future will look like. But it's not clear how exactly this is all going to play out.
Well, I know, for instance, that Padrino Lopez, the defense minister, is currently under indictment in the United States in the federal district in Colombia. And so, it seems to me almost, and I was talking about this earlier with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it seems almost like the lesson that we're using here came out of the miscues in Iraq, in which they toppled Saddam Hussein, defanged the entire military, removed all of Saddam's apparatus that was running the country. The country then fell into chaos. It seems as if what President Trump and Marco Rubio are trying to do is suggest that, I guess, they can work with the Chavistas and then somehow keep the Chavistas still in power to run the operation, but know that the United States is a big hammer over them. I don't see how that works, though.
Yeah, I don't either. The difference, of course, in Iraq is that we actually invaded the country and we did control and own the country. In this case, we don't. So we can't control developments or events on the ground like we used to then, and that was quite complicated, as you indicated. So what we have is sort of Madurismo without Maduro at the moment. The criminal dictatorship, that structure, is still very much in place, and the president seems to be legitimizing Delcy by saying she's the president now, and we're going to be negotiating with her, and she will do what we tell her to do, which is what the president said. Again, there's a lot of actors here. This is a very complex situation. It's not as simple as the president indicated. And I'm not sure that Padrino Lopez, who, by the way, and Diosdado, as you indicated, are also indicted in the United States, are simply going to give up power and be vulnerable to what is happening to Maduro at the moment. Especially, and I want to emphasize this, that the president does not believe that Maria Corina Machado and the opposition is up to the task, and that they will not be in a position to govern the country here for the short to medium term.
I'm struggling to try to figure out that if I was living in Venezuela and I had supported Maria Corina Machado or Edmundo Gonzalez in that last election, and I'm listening to what is coming out of Washington now, and I hear all the talk about oil that the United States is now talking about, doesn't that harken back for a lot of Venezuelans to the bad days? I mean, I realize it was a long time ago. You're talking about the 70s, 80s, in which the United States was exploiting, that led to Chavez's rise, in essence. How does the average Venezuelan, you think, sort through this? It seems from what we're gathering that most of them are just staying indoors and not knowing what to do at this point.
At no point yesterday, Jim, did the president talk about democracy and human rights and the rule of law in Venezuela. He talked about getting Maduro out, and he talked about controlling Venezuela's natural resources, in particular petroleum. That he repeated over and over again. It is clear that it is his priority, that he wants a deal by which the United States and U.S. companies control that industry. That is his priority. So if I'm in Venezuela, and especially if I'm in the leadership, this seems to indicate what the president wants is not so much democracy in Venezuela. What he wants is access to petroleum. And maybe Delcy and Diosdado and others might say there's a deal to be made here. Now that Maduro is gone and the president can declare victory, there's a deal that we can maybe be able to stay in power in some way as long as we make an economic deal with the president. That might be the lesson to be learned. I'm extrapolating, I'm speculating a little bit, Jim, but that's sort of from the press conference, the thing that we can take out of where the United States seems to be standing at the moment.
I want to turn to what the implications of this can be for Cuba, because it seemed to me that Marco Rubio has really been driving this process, this entire policy, this direction towards Venezuela. And I think that he's doing it with an eye towards some sort of a bank shot related to Cuba. I'm not suggesting the U.S. will try to go in and snatch Canel or any of the Cuban leadership, but I do think that this is an attempt to try to squeeze on Cuba. Talk to me about how you see this playing out with Cuba and the rest of the region, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, but particularly Cuba.
I do think this kind of military operation is a one-off. I don't see the president engaging in this kind of gunboat diplomacy throughout the region because there's no political support for that kind of thing within the United States. Marco Rubio has always said, and these are not his words, but that the road to Havana went through Caracas. And so he might think that this might very well be the thing that pushes Cuba over the edge, particularly in light of the horrible, horrible economic situation that the island finds itself, and that now Cuba will be much more isolated, perhaps less access to energy, if in fact there is a real change in regime in Venezuela, and that might bring the regime down without having to do much on the part of the United States in terms of engaging in gunboat diplomacy. Now, this kind of action, I think, for the moment has divided the region and will continue to divide the region. I'm not sure there's a lot of people in the region that would like this kind of gunboat diplomacy from the earlier part of the 20th century, but it has its supporters. Argentina, Paraguay, Panama, Ecuador is supportive of the president's policies, at least in Venezuela. And I don't know about Cuba, but I think in the case of Cuba, they're hoping that the fall or the collapse of the regime, if it does finally collapse, would have a sort of tilting effect on Cuba and bring the end to that regime. I have my questions about that, but that I think might be the game or the play that they're having.
I had one friend of mine in the Cuban American community say to me that what this really proves, and of course he's a little bit more on the left, he said what this really proves is that if Donald Trump would have cared more about Cuba if Cuba had oil. And the fact that Venezuela had oil is the main reason he's interested in Venezuela. That's the lesson to be drawn, and not that there's some larger thing that is going to take place with regard to removing the remnants of Castro's regime. Your thoughts, just as we go?
Yeah, I mean, the president has been talking about oil in Venezuela for quite a long time. This is not just a function of what just happened yesterday. He has been saying that the oil belongs to us, the same way that he felt that the oil in Iraq belonged to us. And this is his priority, right? He never really talks about democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. It's not even in the national security document that was published a few weeks ago. His priority is clearly, I think, to control natural resources in Venezuela and perhaps in the region, if necessary, rare earth minerals, and specifically, and to get a win. And he's getting a win by removing Maduro from power and bringing him to justice in the United States. The question is what comes the day after, and that's a much more complex question.
Frank, we'll continue to follow this, and I thank you very much for your time. All right.
Thank you, Jim.
Up next, we talk to a Venezuelan journalist and the founder or the managing director of the Caracas Chronicles. Sorry about that. The latest on the ground. Stay with us. Welcome back. Getting news out of Venezuela has always been challenging, but one of the best sources for information is the Caracas Chronicles, an English language website that has a network of very brave reporters throughout Venezuela. The general director of the website is Raul Stolk, and he joins us now. Raul, thank you very much for joining us. And I just want to jump right in by talking about or asking you, what are you hearing from your network of folks in Venezuela as to what the conditions are like right now?
Hi, Jim. Thank you for having me. Well, the general conditions in Venezuela, there is like, as a friend told me, it's not even a tense calm, it's just calm. Yesterday, after the attack, there was a significant lack of military presence in the streets. There has been a lot of police presence. Right now, people, obviously yesterday, streets were empty, but supermarkets had long lines outside with people, just doing like their, something that Venezuelans are kind of used to. It's packing supermarkets just to do their nervous shopping. But there is like a general calm in the country, and people are just like standing by to see how this story progresses.
I want to go to the issue of Donald Trump's comments that I think probably took a lot of people by surprise when it came to Maria Corina Machado, and basically saying that she doesn't have the support or the respect of the people. From the reporting you've done since the election in which her party won overwhelmingly and there was widespread fraud, that's why one of the reasons why Nicolas Maduro is an illegitimate leader or was in Venezuela. And yet she received, I think, upwards of 70% of the vote, her party and her candidate. Talk to me about the role that Maria Corina Machado has in Venezuela in terms of among the people, and your reaction to what Donald Trump said.
Well, I think that we can safely say that Maria Corina Machado is the main political force in Venezuela, beyond the opposition, as you said. Edmundo González Urrutia, who was the candidate that she backed because she was banned from running, had almost 70% of the vote in an election that wasn't fair. He won 70% of the vote in an election that wasn't fair. If the election had been fair, probably he would, he would have had more. She remains, obviously, she spent a long time in hiding in Venezuela, and now she's out when she was awarded and she received the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think that a big part of her political capital has remained intact. That doesn't mean that's before the Venezuelan people, but that doesn't mean that the Trump administration is going to take that into account in the strategy that they're seeing moving forward. I believe that the dismissive comment from Trump, it's very much Trump being Trump. You can take it as you want. Maybe he wanted the Nobel Peace Prize for himself. He said it before, so maybe that the tone came from that. But definitely, I think that strategy-wise, the Trump administration probably seeing that moving forward with a transition, dealing with Chavismo is easier than trying to impose a whole political structure that doesn't include them when Chavismo still has the backing of the military and several other, let's say, political institutions in Venezuela.
How do you think the people would respond in Venezuela to the idea of Chavismo still surviving there in the country and the military still playing the role that they do? It seems almost as if what the president is signaling is that, Frank Mora was just talking about how the president really wasn't talking about democracy. He was talking about oil. Yeah. And that if the goal here is simply to extract Venezuela's natural resources, its precious metals and its oil, and the U.S. oil companies are permitted back in, that Chavismo is fine with him. How do you think they'll respond to something like that?
Well, obviously the people want a significant change, and a significant change implies getting rid of the whole Chavista structure. But I know that there was like a glaring absence of the word democracy yesterday, but it is still very, very early. I think that one part of the strategy that we will see before ourselves sooner than later is talk about an election. Which is, most Venezuelans are going to say we already voted, but I think that this is going to be a compromise. In the end, the best compromise is one when neither party is completely happy. So I think that this may point toward that direction. But one thing that has to be said is that if we're expecting Chavismo to preside over a fair election, be it in 30 days as it should be, if Chavismo were to follow their own constitution, or be it in 3 months or 6 months, having Chavismo completely preside over that process, it's still going to be a complicated hurdle to get over. And what we're going to see in the coming days.
Raul, let me just jump in here for a second. I want to just sort of take a step back for a second. You follow what goes on in Venezuela far closer than I do. Had you seen in your scope of things that you expected to happen as the U.S. built up their military and the rest of it? Did you think that what happened yesterday was going to happen, that they would go in and snatch Maduro like that? And also, you know, in talking to your correspondents that are there, that have lived under that repression, just from a personal standpoint, what's your reaction and what was their reaction to Maduro being taken out by the United States?
We thought that that the Trump administration was in an incremental path pressure that could end with an extraction or an incursion similar to the one that we thought. But we definitely thought that it was going to be probably, you know, not January 3rd, but definitely before the State of the Union address. We didn't. We were betting more on the Trump administration going after Diosdado Cabello and sort of like neutralizing that more aggressive arm of Chavismo to then negotiate with Maduro, and not necessarily going after him. But you know, this is something that we were looking at, but we were completely surprised by the timing.
Raul, I gotta jump in here. We'll have you back on again. I love talking to you, and thank you for the work that you do. And Caracas Chronicles, it's a great website to go visit. I encourage you to do so. We'll be right back. The CBS Miami News team is continuing to gather the latest information and details out of Venezuela and here with the Venezuelan community in South Florida. These are the latest images of the damage from the U.S. strikes in Caracas. Now, we will have live CBS News coverage tonight on CBS News Miami at 6:30 and again at 11. We'll also be bringing you updates all day on our CBS Miami website, cbsmiami.com. Our reporter, Larry Seward, is heading to New York City to cover Maduro's capture and his expected appearance in federal court. Watch for his live reports starting there tomorrow. That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us, and have a good day.